Welcome to everybody here, all our audience, and everybody else who's listening in to the next installment of the LC Live, which is our offering. The webinar is our offering to everybody, in which an article in the previous issue is discussed, and the author of that article is invited to speak to somebody regarding issues that arise out of the article itself. Today, we are going to discuss uh, Subir Shukla's The School as a Social Space. And with him, conversing with him, is Meenakshi Pant of the foundation itself. So, a very warm welcome to both of you. Let me just introduce both of them to all our audience. Subir Shukla is with Group Ignis and works on improving the quality of education systems in India and countries in Asia and Africa, focusing on the needs of the marginalized children. He was previously Chief Consultant, DPEP, and Education Quality Improvement Advisor to the Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, leading the development of quality framework for the RTE Act of 2009. He is also part of the team of experts tasked by the Niti Aayog to develop India's vision for school education 2035. He writes and publishes for children through Manas Books and brings out Chahak, an educational learning magazine for children. He recently co-authored Child Development and Education in the 21st Century, and this book was published by Springer, Singapore. Welcome to the show, Subir. Meenakshi Pant has been a resource person in the foundation for the last 9 years. With a master's degree in biology and environmental science, she has been a postgraduate teacher for 15 years. She is now currently engaged in capacity building initiatives for primary school teachers. Over to both of you, and we look forward to a lively discussion. Thank you.
So, very good evening, Prema and Subir, and all the audiences. And thank you, Prema, for setting the context for the discussion today. As you rightly said, we are here to engage in a discussion around the article Remodeling School as a Social Space, authored by Subir Shukla. And so, over to the article straight away rather than setting any more context. So, Subir, I read your article and it seems to be most appropriate considering the current scenario, the crisis that our entire education system is facing today. It begins with a very interesting experience that you shared, wherein you came across a teacher who is not worried about this stoppage of funds to his school and says that his school is not in the building or the furniture, but what happens between his students and him. This certainly is a very powerful statement in itself. So, in what way did it change your perspective regarding schooling and school education? And if you could also share what was your notion earlier prior to this experience about the same.
Thank you. Yeah. So, having worked in the field, I was in a tribal village for a long time, and then also in the programs like DPEP. The idea I really had was to look at education through the components it has. It has infrastructure, it has pedagogy, it has textbooks, materials, assessment, and I was looking at all of those things, and they were all valid and valuable. But what this teacher helped me see was that a school is not what it contains, what exists. It is in how it is used. The definition that I came up with really was that a school is a set of processes inside a set of relationships for optimal and higher order learning. So prior to this, if you had asked me about a school, I would have talked more about just basic learning outcomes, and I would have talked about teachers and all the things which should really be there and the purpose of schooling, all of that. But this helped me sort of put things together in a certain way, and that helped me understand that you can have a fantastic school under a tree and a very bad school in a high quality building. It helped me get my priorities right. This is important because in large scale programs, if you see how they are designed, they often spend money on what is, I say, what can be inaugurated or what can be released. But processes, relationships, they can't be inaugurated one day, they can't just be released. It needs a very different approach. So it helped me see what we need to do differently in the programs that we run, whether it is in a single school or in 1 lakh schools. The perspective has to be quite different. That's what I learned from that. And also the temporariness of physical inputs versus the long term value of the intangibles is what I learned from that.
Right, and that is reflected quite, a lot in your article overall. Another thing is like there are two other interesting statements in your article. First, the title itself, "School as a Social Space," and the other, "School may now not be what we think it is." So both these are novel ways of looking at traditional orifice. So could you please explain what exactly do you mean by that?
So, I tried to imagine all the different actions, interactions, activities that define the life of a child in a school. And in my article, I collected a set of verbs. I thought that is a very important aspect of looking at a school. What is it that we do, or what is it that happens in a school? If you simply articulate it in that sense, if you just say in school we teach, we learn, you're not really bringing out the nuances, the depth, the details, the finer points of what happens. So, for example, this list, it's not a complete list by any means. We talk, we play, work, write, listen, draw, experiment, connect, read, explain, ask, instruct, narrate, try, encourage, exchange, meet, discover, argue, care, make, create, conclude, agree, help, compete, explore, reflect, admire, give, lead, share, enjoy, dislike, bond. I mean, look at the range of things that happens in a school. So, and a lot of these things you do not do in isolation. You do it with each other. The flavor, the result, what you gain from it, what you feel about it, it happens because of who you are interacting with and how you are interacting with. So when we think of a school, when we want to design, let's say, improvement in what happens in a school, it's not enough to think that there will be material or there will be some teacher training. What will it result in? What I listed out, let's say 25 different items. How will these 25 items change? So if you're looking at school uh, and you're not looking at the interactions that happen between children and others, you're not looking at the school really speaking. And that's what I mean when I say a school is a social space. It's how we relate with each other, what we do with each other, how we help each other, or how we gain from being with each other, or sometimes how we lose from being with each other. All of that really defines the experience of school. And that's why at another point I mentioned that when you look back at your school, you're less likely to remember your lessons, but you're likely to remember other things. And those are the social aspects of being in school. So that's in continuation of school as a set of processes within a set of relationships, that idea. And now if we look at uh, what is happening with schools now in particular in a post-pandemic environment, uh, there are some very big shifts that are occurring. So if I look at the government school, a lot of children have migrated from private school to government schools. A lot of children who were in government schools are not able to continue, they have left. Teachers are going to face a different group of students, which is diverse in a way in which they are not used to. uh, teachers themselves have been through a lot of trauma. See, in the earlier post pre-pandemic times when we wanted school improvement, we generally thought it is children who are not doing well, teachers are okay. But now teachers are also not okay. They've experienced all kinds of difficulties during these last 2 years. Not only that, what is now expected of the school is to provide a space for children to recover, not just learning outcomes, but recover themselves as persons. They've been without friends, they've been without others, and they've been without all those 30 different activities that I mentioned, those verbs. They've been without it. How is a teacher going to enable that, especially a teacher who herself has been through difficult situations? The challenge is that the school is expected to make a transition from one focused almost entirely on academic and cognitive aspects to socio-emotional mental health issues, which it never did earlier. And in a situation where teachers themselves seem to be receiving very little sympathy or empathy from those who are their officials or those who are responsible for helping them. So the question is, how does a system make a transition from being focused on exam results or assessment results to one that is focused on this holistic way of looking at children, at learning, and at social emotional dimensions? So a school is now definitely not what it was earlier, because we have, the children are not the same, the teachers are not the same, what they're expected to do is not the same, even the needs of the system are not the same. It's not the same school you're coming back to.
So, rightly said, Subir. I totally agree with what you have said. And looking at the current scenario, during the COVID pandemic has led to an educational emergency, I would say, where the learners have been away from the school for almost 18 months. So, this really gives us an opportunity to restart the schooling process anew. And so, according to you, what should be the learning recovery process like? Because we know that across the globe, children have gone through learning loss and a learning gap has been created. So what should be the learning recovery process according to you, and if you could also enlist out the steps that can be taken to be followed for this recovery process?
Sure. So, you know, governments are so much worried about children's learning levels that almost entirely the focus is on learning outcomes. But what are the educational outcomes that you are looking for? If you look at any curriculum, it will talk of holistic development of children. But somehow all the discussion on learning recovery is only about foundational learning or about the kind of learning which you can do a test on or appear in an exam. That is a relatively less important function of education. The bigger function is that of the development of a child as a whole human being who feels a sense of confidence. In fact, if you ask anybody on the road, what are the top 5 qualities you want to see in a child coming out of education, they will say, I want the child to be confident, to be able to take a decision, to be able to work with others. They're not going to say, I want a child who gets high marks in foundational learning. That's not to say that foundational learning is useless. It's very important, but focusing only on those outcomes is to do injustice to the idea of recovery after the pandemic. There are mental health issues, there are physical health issues, and of course, there are social and emotional health issues, which every child is suffering for. In fact, teachers in Delhi, for example, right now are saying that how children are, in fact, not even able to talk with friends face to face. They're not able to take part in the teaching learning process. So I think the point I have made in the article also is that we have to recover the learning process, not just the learning outcome. So therefore, when children come back after having been through a difficult time, they're so excited They faced many difficulties. Many children faced a lot of economic hardships. They faced health issues. Maybe they saw someone, they saw a death in their family, and some of them experienced migration, and they experienced all kinds of deprivation. They were away from their friends. They come back to school, and what do? You give them a test. That is a seriously limited way of looking at education and at your role. What is our job? It is children's right to feel wanted, to feel comfortable, to feel safe, to feel that they want to do things, and then to come on to the whole issue of taking learning forward. So in order to do this, I would say that we first need to recover the situation where there is a kind of participatory learning process in which children do get involved and engaged. And to do that, I would say uh, that firstly, since in the pandemic we managed only through the community, continue that. Involve the community, discuss with everyone how you want to open the school, and perhaps have a mela, like a fair like situation where you celebrate coming together. It's a joyous occasion. And for the first few days, I would spend time only listening to children, and even telling them about my own experience. What did we do in the last 2 years? How did you manage? I know when I was giving you the online class, you were going around doing other things. What were you doing? I want teachers to interact with children and learn what their life was like. And maybe, they'll surprise you. They learn so many new things. Children are dying for somebody to listen to them, but at the same time, when somebody stays in front of them, they are going to be tongue tied. So, therefore, a gentle process of playing with each other, not having a timetable, in fact, in the first 2 or 3 days, children doing what they like, meeting friends, coming to the teacher when they want, and then discussing. Once they've sort of been through that, it can be half a day, it can be 5 days, then talking with them. Okay, now we are beginning. We have to do many things that we were doing before. How do we go about it now? Are you ready? Can we start with the daily schedule as we used to have? Can we start ringing the bell? Will you be able to follow that? And encourage a lot of physical activity. In fact, you might find in many places that children are getting tired doing physical activities, and they will keep wanting the comfort of the screen, especially if that's what they got used to. So ease into the process. Next, and this is the critical part, I think the school of the future, by future I mean the future after the pandemic, from now, and schools may be closing or opening depending on whether pandemic comes again, or also there are now extreme climate events. We have had schools closed due to floods and winter and so on. So schools are not going to be stable in such a way. So we now need to shift to a position where the school is the business of everyone and not of the teacher alone. So I see children as partners in that process, and I would discuss with them, not only are you ready now for the schedule, and to talk it out with them, and then to ask them, what do they feel they remember, what do they feel they are weak in or strong in. I would do a few test activities to see how they can participate. I'll do a quiz around a textbook, introduce that, and then I'll ask children that in order to begin properly, I have to know where you are. So is it okay if I conduct a test? And we can do that again whenever you're ready. And then I would do a test, and I would do what I call a laddered test, which is, if a student is in class 5, I'll give a test which starts from class 1. And after 4 questions, it's the next class and the next class and the next class. And wherever a student stops, I get to know that is the level of the student. And I will collaborate with other teachers to bring out what part of the previous classes needs to be revised. One very important thing is, everything that was done earlier does not have to be repeated, but the prerequisites, which are absolutely necessary for that class, do. And prerequisites are usually only about 30%. So I would use that kind of approach and create a lot of self-learning activities, maybe have 2 or 3 different levels of groups. I will have a mix of taught and self-learning situations in the class. And especially for older children, I would not have short 30-40 minute periods. Because when you stop doing something and you restart, you lose a lot of time. So if you want learning to be accelerated, you need to create a very engaging situation where children work on one thing for a long enough time. And I am even open to the idea for, especially for older students, to devote a whole day only to one subject like maths. And we have done this at different times earlier, so I won't take time on that. But the basic shift is make children partners in the process, get back to recovering the learning process, set targets along with students that actually in a normal course, if we were to teach it, it would take 5 days. How much time do you think we can do it in? Let children set a challenge for themselves and work with that. Instead of trying to be like a shepherd with a stick and trying to drive cattle, we need a very different approach. And interestingly, if you do this, you will not just be recovering learning outcomes or the learning process, you will be recovering education, you will be recovering the school, you will be discovering yourself. And that's the direction to go.
So, totally agree with you, Subir. What I interpret from whatever you said just now is like we need to give a lot of flexibility to the schooling process and look from the child's point of view, child's perspective about the situation in the classroom and accordingly modify our school processes. So, just now you mentioned something about the assessment. So, normally a school is perceived as an academic place where children go mainly to pass examination. But I feel, and it is also coming through this discussion, that it is much, much more than that. So, what is your idea of assessment and how significant it is in the teaching learning process?
So, okay, first one has to see the shift that has happened in India, which we don't always see. Uh, One of my professors used to say that 1857 was a turning point in the history of India, but India refused to turn. In the same way, RTE was a turning point in the history of India, but Indian education refused to turn. One of the big things that RTE did was that it made it clear that education is the right of the child, and all of us, adults, teachers, for us, we are duty bearers in this. Now, what does this mean in terms of how education is offered? Before the right to education, education was offered as a kind of privilege. You are poor, but you are getting educated. How great the government is to have created a school for you. Hmm. You are, and in fact, that is why even now we have, even though he's from a poor family, he has done well in education, is said, even now. So, in that, education is a privileged thing. The idea behind assessment was twofold. First, if you perform according to my expectations, then you qualify for certain further privileges. Like, if you do well in class 6, you are allowed to go to class 7. If you do well in this exam, then you can go to college, otherwise you can't. So that's what, that's so, it's been said so many times that assessment and exams have been used as a way to filter society. The other part of assessment was to uh, play the deeper role of what I will call control. It was a means of making everyone be what you want them to be. When you look upon children as wet clay that you can mold or empty pot that you can fill, then you have the view that if they can match my requirements in my assessment, only then they are okay, otherwise they are not okay. And if they don't, I can punish them by saying that I will deduct your marks, I will not prevent you from going ahead. So assessment was a device for control, and therefore The whole game for children was either how can I please my teacher, how can I please my adult by saying what they want me to say or reproducing what they want me to reproduce, or the other side of it, how can I game the system? How can I appear to know without actually knowing? And you all know how that worked out, and even now that continues to work out. So that is how assessment was. Assessment was seen as a means of disempowering children in a situation where actually education existed for them. But from the right to education onwards, and there is no reason why this could not have happened earlier from 1986 or from any other time. But really speaking, there is no legitimacy for that view anymore. If I am bound, if I am accountable for ensuring a student's learning, my role is to find out if I'm doing my work okay or not, and for therefore I have to, with permission of the student, perform certain actions which tell me whether I have succeeded in communicating properly or not. So the role of assessment is now shifted dramatically to enabling the teacher to ensure that learning is happening, ensure that he or his or her work is actually moving forward. From if you do assessment properly, what you will learn is uh, uh, did I do what I was supposed to do? Uh, which individual child needs what help further, and uh, what do I need to do with the class as a whole? That's the purpose of assessment, really speaking. It's not to say to a child that you are below this line or above this line. That's an outdated notion. But if I were to extend this further, and if I were to say, can assessment be an empowering tool in the class? So to do that, I'll give you first one example. I saw this actually happening in Bihar when we were testing the CCE that we had developed. A teacher asked in class 7 students to draw a human skeleton. She was teaching that. And all the students made, about 40 of them, and she awarded two of them A, which was the highest grade, and everyone else got C or D, mostly D. But here's the thing, what she did is she said, the reason why I have given these children A is because they have the following five qualities in their input. So the other children said, but if we do the same, we will also get it. She said, of course. So the whole class did it again. This time, many more children got A. There were many few D's. They moved up. But believe it or not, the children went on doing it again and again till every single child got an A. And I've seen this happen many, many other times. Children you think are dumb, who are not going to perform, they actually do extraordinarily well, provided they understand, they know what is the process that is going on and what they can do to actually improve themselves. So I would really envisage a class in partnership with students where I start by asking, here are five things we can do. This is the two things we want to start with. Are you okay? And this will take usually 10 days. Can we do it in 10 days? Can we do it in 5 days? And I will set a target with students, and then I'll give to students some time that how will you make sure you do it faster than the usual time? And by which point do you want to know if you have got it? Because doing it means you have to get 100% in all the points that come up. So do you want to be able to know how well you're doing? So here is the test available. Whenever you're ready, you tell me I'm beginning. So now what happens is I teach, and students also work on their own. We collaborate, we work out, we plan how are we going, how's our progress, and then we check ourselves. And students might just pick up an assessment and do and say, oh, I didn't get question 3, can you help me out here? So you understand there's a very different kind of process where assessment is playing a role in empowering students to play this proactive and decisive role in their own learning process. The kind of student who comes out through this would be phenomenally different. So that's how I see assessment as playing a very different role.
So, whatever I perceive from what you said about assessment is that it should be a process of empowering the child rather than creating a fearful environment for the child. And
Absolutely.
moreover, yeah, and for a teacher, it should be a self-reflective process where the teacher gets to know through assessment how effectively she has been able to deliver the lessons. So, thank you so much, Subir. Prema, do we have any questions in the chat box from the audience? If yes, you can take over.
We don't have any questions right now, but there is a comment which I think is very relevant because Subir himself mentioned it. So Vishakha Tiwari says that the verbs in the article were meaningful and brought joy and learning to her as she read the article. So I think Subir, the whatever the intention was to all those verbs. I think everyone has been thinking about what a lot goes on in school without actually our knowing it. I've been thinking about my own school days, and I'm sure everybody has all that running, talking, speaking, asking, fighting, even arguing, running to class, even teasing the teachers. All those things, made up the composite whole. And I think our listeners are also reliving their school days and saying that. So I just wanted to bring out what Vishakha Tiwari had said.
Yeah. Thank you, Vishaka.
Over to you, Meenakshi.
Okay, so another very thank you, Vishaka, for that wonderful comment and a compliment to the article. So really appreciable. So another very interesting observation in the article is about taking community as knowledge partners. So what exactly does it mean? Perceiving community as a knowledge partner, especially in context of the government schools, where mostly the parents are not very well educated. They come from a very humble upbringing and a background, and are not perceived as someone who is having some kind of knowledge. So how come is it possible that community can be taken as a knowledge partner? What is your view on this?
So, in fact, uh, I learned about this, when I started living in a tribal village, and every day when I would go out, for example, say in the beginning, I went out herding cattle with children, and I discovered that there was an enormous amount of knowledge that these children had. For instance, they knew when I asked them how many trees have thorns, and they named 17 of such trees. Later, I asked MSc botany students in Delhi University the same question, and they gave me 9 such trees. They would show me, for example, on a bank of earth, a small hole, and they will say, this is a scorpion hole, and the scorpion is inside, or the scorpion is not inside, and they would always know. And they were always right too. They could prove it to me that they were right by putting in a stick. And I always asked them, how do you know? And they looked at me in wonder. They said, such a big man, how can you not know? And after I managed to convince them that actually I really didn't know, they reluctantly explained to me, thinking that it was hardly worth mentioning, that when a scorpion goes out of its hole, its tail is up, so it scrapes the top, and if there's a little bit of soil inside, it means it's inside. If there's no such thing, it's outside. Now I can give you thousands of such instances, right? One, and I thought, here I am from a university, I was teaching in a college, this, that, and suddenly you realize, what do you know? You know nothing. It made me question whose knowledge is knowledge. Is knowledge the only to be found in research, in universities, among the elite, among the so-called educated? Is the knowledge of the people not knowledge? So, for example, I knew an elderly man who knew how to treat animals with herbs, and it always worked. I saw people using jungli tulsi, which they call jungli tulsi, but they rubbed it on their hand and they plucked. honey. Uh, I talked to people who had to go from one place to another place through the jungle, and they carried very little with them. They would spend night and they would even cook meals, and they told me how they cook a meal without having any burtan, any utensils. So slowly you realize that there is another world out there, and that a lot that we have actually derived. And there are studies of how, for example, medicine emerged from the knowledge of midwives and so on. So uh, that, you know, in a hierarchical situation, we tend to just assume that they that people that whose children are in school, they know nothing. So the first thing that I want to mention is that uh, lack of education does not prevent anyone from having knowledge. And sometimes going through education can actually reduce the knowledge you do have. So let's be a little careful over here. Next, uh, every community member has a lot to contribute to the traditional so-called learning that we are talking about. I've given these examples earlier, but I know no harm in repeating them. A truck driver knows about the geography of India in a big way. An ironsmith, a lohar, knows how to separate impurities from metals. A health worker knows about the body. A farmer knows about plants, and so on. In fact, a beggar at a red light crossing in Delhi can in a second can tell you whether you're going to give money or not. There's a deep level of psychology that these persons have. The point is, everybody has that knowledge. Can I bring it into the classroom? Can we have a dedicated time wherein someone comes into the class and shares? Can a grandmother who's free come in and talk about how the village was settled? That's local history for you. Can somebody bring in the oldest article they have in their home and talk about it? And so on. Can a cycle mechanic come and tell us why a cycle wheel, when the pedal is moved forward, moves forward, but when it is moved backward, it does not move backward? And so on. So the point is, if you were to do that, you would value people's knowledge. Children will feel proud that their family, their community's knowledge is valued, that they have that they are respected. I'm saying this because, right now, for instance, in our country, a very big effort is on to bring in foundational learning in multilingual situations using the home language. The biggest problem in home language is not the lack of the knowledge of that language, but the fact that it is looked down upon. If a child were to speak his or her home language in the class, the teacher will often say in Hindi, "Chup bat gawar kahin ka," shut up, you cunt pumpkin, is what the teacher will say. Hmm. And the child will just keep quiet and not speak, and not by not speaking will not learn, because you do not have a space in the class. You are not valued. Your community have been negated by saying that you are worth nothing. You people know nothing. This little education is good enough for you. You're only good enough to herd cattle. That's what school tells students. So how do we work out of that? There are many things you can do, but one of them is to find people from within the community, especially from among parents whose children are in school, who will be willing to give a bit of time, not too much, maybe once 15 days. Bring in one person, have them interact with children, share a bit of what they know. Maybe you can have a few questions. I'll call a truck driver and say that, how many places have you been to that are very different from here? Tell me about them. Then I will show them on the map. Then I will ask him to describe it. Maybe if I have a laptop or a tablet, I will even show a photo of those places. It will be a very different kind of classroom. So that's how I see community. The thing is, in our context, we talked of community initially more as community as having of being one of getting children to school, ensuring attendance. but there's a lot more that they can do. And then slowly it became that you'd have to do shramdan, do some cultivation of vegetable garden, build a fence. Then it slowly become part of SMC, do some management, do a bit of accounts and so on. But really speaking, community has a bigger role, which is that of a knowledge partner, wherein you share your knowledge with children, with the teacher. You become a partner with the teacher, and you take that to a much bigger level. I mean, let's not forget that before school system was created, communities were educating their children. Then we came in, we took away that role, and we said, no, now we'll tell your children about the capital of Russia and not nothing about what you have. That's not a very good way to do education. We can do much better than that. And I think this is a simple way to do it, especially post pandemic, because community has already played such a big role. I think it would be a fantastic opportunity to build on.
Thank you, Subir. We have got some comments in the chat box, so I would like to read them out to you. So, Srini speaks that we need to focus on educational outcomes and not learning outcomes after hearing out the discussion, and recover the learning process and the learning loss now. Then she says that school is not only a set of processes but also of relationships. These three statements are my takeaways from today's discussion. So thank you, Subirji. Right. So then another question comes up from Vishakha Tiwari. She says that though the idea is true and works for every learner, but as an educator, how can we make our teachers believe that this partnership with kids works, especially when teachers are unaware of this powerful tool? So,
Right.
any response? Yeah.
Sure. So, it's essentially what you're saying is how can you help teachers believe in every child and believe in themselves of being able to enable every child. Uh, and my answer to this really is how many teachers have experienced a situation when somebody has believed in them. So mostly when teachers come for in-service program, they might be told you are creating the future of tomorrow, etc. But in reality, what happens is that mostly they are told that they are not doing their work. Uh, every time a government passes an order saying you shall teach this on this day through this method and this material, what you're communicating to the teacher is that I do not trust in you to believe to be able to take decisions for your children. I come across a large number of organizations who keep in social media keep saying teachers are not teaching, teachers are not accountable, and so on. So if we do not believe in teachers, I do not expect teachers to believe in anyone else, especially children. Therefore, the if I were to work with a group of teachers, 30 schools or 5 schools or 1 school or whatever, my first starting point would be, I believe in you, and as a sign of that, uh, the way I want to process is with you playing that role of taking certain critical decisions as we move forward. And therefore, I would present a lot of options, ask them to choose, and what they choose, I would work on that. I would also do an exercise which is called a beliefs and assumptions exercise. We need to overtly discuss what are our beliefs. For example, uh, uh, our children are naughty and it is our job to put them in discipline. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or do you partially agree? Now, ultimately, which of these three choices is right is not important. What is important is that when you discuss this kind of question, everybody should express their view. And you will slowly discover that people have many things to say. They might say that actually children are often exploring and we mistake that for discipline. Or because I was beaten, that's why I've become what I am now, I'm so good. Then you have to point out maybe you're not as good as you could be. Uh, and it's a process of exploring the limits of our thinking. But more importantly, once you discuss this, it's important to document what are some of the things we agree with. For example, we all agree that children are active, they're curious. We all agree that adults can play a role in encouraging them. We agree that adults can play a negative role as well. We agree that discipline is about, let's say, knowing the rules or creating the rules and following them yourself, so on. But then my next step would be to discuss, okay, now we've got some ideas. This is all theoretical. In your class, what are the three things you are going to do which you've not done till now? Tell me that. And when can I come to your class to see you? And how can I support you? And when teachers are doing, and now here I want to make a very important statement, which is that I would not go to their class and do anything with children myself. Yes, people often use demo teaching as a very valuable thing because just to show that it can be done. The thing is, teachers always know it can be done. What they don't tell you is, you are coming here and doing it now. I have to do this every day. And I have to do it in the middle of a situation where I'm being asked by the administration to do so many other things. Therefore, what I always find more valuable is, I ask a teacher, what are you planning to do? And then I stand by the side and let the teacher do, and I whisper in the teacher's ear, how about that girl? She seems to have an idea. Or, that's a fantastic point. Or I would say that, here, this child is not getting you. Or, that was very well done. And when the teacher does it, my job is to make the teacher feel successful in doing that in the class. If I do it, what I'm telling the teacher is, look, I can do it, but you are not doing it, which means I am Ram, you are Ravan. That's not very helpful. But on the other hand, if I were to downplay my role, but highlight the role of the teacher and become a support to the teacher, and then end by saying, this was such a great session, I always knew you could do it. Then when I have gone, that memory of that time will enable the teacher to do it more the next time and be waiting when we can meet again so that he or she can share that next level of success. If you look at all the literature, and I worked 35 years on this, in the class and in training and through academic work, there seems to be only one way of enabling teachers to change. When we talk of teachers teaching better, we are not talking of a small thing, we are talking of a deep change. The deep change is in understanding what your role is in relation to children. That's the concept of guru as a giver of knowledge, it runs in our blood, no? But we are talking now of a situation where you work with the child, by the side of the child, not as a giver, but as a facilitator. It's a very different thing. So you're losing your status of being above as a giver. No, you're not doing Gyan Dan. You're doing knowledge generation, which is a very different type of activity. And the one thing that seems to work, in fact, I know that APU or APF worked with Karthik Mullidharan for 4 years to see if, teachers are paid more when children learn more, if that works, and that doesn't work. Nowhere has it worked. The one thing that works is when teachers experience success. And success is when children say, sir, we really enjoyed your class, or ma'am, we miss you when you're not there. Or if a parent says, we are so proud, we are so happy you're our child's teacher. That is when a teacher changes. So this is the way, through a very non-threatening, gentle, two-way communication which foregrounds the teacher and her interest and concerns, to a situation where in the classroom we support the teacher in short, small steps. It's called the theory of small wins. You can look it up. It's nothing new. It was made in 1964. So, but it really works. And that's how, especially for people who are working in the field, have faith in the teachers and yourself. You cannot drive change, but you can be part of the process.
So, agree to whatever you have said, Subir, and a lot of things have been discussed during this session. And I believe that this has generated much more interest in the audience, and they would certainly go and read your article to understand the rest of the things. Now, I have been fielding questions to you. Now, what in the end, I would like to know a very tricky question, maybe. Yeah. If the word limit to this article would not have been 2,000 words, what else would you have added to this article?
Yes, I would have added one book at whole book or maybe more. Uh, so, uh, Meenakshi, I see one question from Mukesh Malviya. Can I just take that?
Yeah, sure. Yes.
पब्लिक अपने
You
ज्ञान
read it? Should
को
I
कक्षा
read?
की भाषा
Yeah.
में और कक्षा के तरीके में कैसे डिलीवर कर सकती है? मुकेश, ये बहुत अच्छा प्रश्न है आपने। इसमें मुझे लगता है ये समस्या नहीं है कि उनको कक्षा की भाषा में, उन्हें अपनी भाषा में कहने की ज़रूरत है। और शिक्षक की भूमिका ये है कि वो 1-2 शुरुआती प्रश्न या ट्रिगर जिसको कहें, वो छोड़ दें और उन्हें बताने दें और बच्चों को देखते रहें। जहाँ-जहाँ उनको लगा बच्चों को समझ में नहीं आ रहा है, थोड़ा-सा रोक के दोहरा सकते हैं, अपने तरीके में दोहरा सकते हैं। बच्चों से कह सकते हैं, आपने क्या पकड़ा, आप बताइए। तो उसे कक्षा की भाषा में बदलने का काम उनका है, जो कक्षा के लोग हैं, यानी शिक्षक हैं और बच्चे हैं। पब्लिक का काम है कि वो अपने ज्ञान को जिस भी तरीके से कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि हम अगर फिर ऐसा कहेंगे कि आपको हमारी भाषा में हमारे तरीके से बोलना है, तो एक और छलनी लग जाएगी और फिर से वो बाहर हो जाएंगे और फिर वही बात आ जाएगी कि आपका ज्ञान तो बांटने लायक है नहीं। वो प्रॉब्लम पब्लिक की नहीं है, वो हमारी है। और इसको जब तक हम लोग करेंगे नहीं, देखेंगे नहीं, इसके तरीके नहीं निकलेंगे, तब तक ये हम इस पे और आधिकारिक तौर पे नहीं कह पाएंगे। जो हमने इसको गुजरात में करके देखा था, वहाँ पे हमारा अनुभव यह था, जिस दिन लोहार को बुलाया गया, वो अपने सबसे अच्छे कपड़े पहन के आया कि आज वो स्कूल में जा रहा है, शिक्षा के काम में जुड़ रहा है, शिक्षक जैसा रोल निभाने जा रहा है। तो बहुत अच्छी एक फीलिंग थी उसकी, तो उसको उसी तरह से लेते हैं। और जिस भी तरीके से, और ये भी होगा कि हाँ, कुछ जाति के बच्चे होंगे जिनको लगेगा ये किसको बुला लाए। इन सारी समस्याओं के साथ जूझना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि स्कूल जो है वो वास्तविक समाज का हिस्सा ही है। लेकिन अगर इससे वहाँ हम नहीं जूझेंगे तो फिर बच्चे कहाँ सीखेंगे? तो मुझे लगता है कि ये काम स्कूल का है। और अभी कोई भी कह सकता है कि शिक्षक ये सब क्यों करे? मैं कहूँगा क्यों ना करे। मुझे तो विश्वास है कि बहुत सारे शिक्षक इस तरह की चीज़ ज़्यादा करना चाहेंगे, ना कि उस तरह का नॉन एकेडमिक काम जो उन पे थोपा गया है। So having said that, what else would I have included? So I was naturally limited to talking about the teacher and the school. But in reality, there are many other things which need to be considered, and this is also related to some of the questions asked. One is, I didn't elaborate much on it, but I did indicate that change is not a one-time process. It's a step-by-step process. One very big learning I have is that, when I say it, it doesn't sound big, I'm sorry. We always try to focus on what is very important when we try to make a change. But we need to focus on what is the easiest. So in any change, there may be 30, 40 different things that you have to do. If you start with the one or two that are the easier ones, then you succeed, and that gives you the confidence to do the next level. Whereas if you start with the most important, but the most important is often the very difficult, and you fail in that, then you say, this thing doesn't work. So let me give you one example of this. In teacher training, doing an activity orally, like if I were to ask children, name things which have the sound p in it, it's very easy. So you start saying pankha, palang, or whatever things you have around you, pen, computer, etc. Children are sitting where they are sitting, I am standing where I am standing. It's easy. The next level is, if I give children three letters, I say, write take ka, na, and ma, and make as many words as you can. You can put any matra. Now I can't keep standing where I'm standing. I have to go around, I have to repeat my instructions, I have to make sure that they have understood. So that's the next level. Now I want to do the same thing, but I'll give students some cards. So here are cards, you have to arrange them in and make words and copy them down. Now I have to first form groups, I have to give instructions, I have to distribute the material, then I have to go around, then I have to see who's doing it or not, and I have to give. You understand, it's a lot more complex. But in teacher training, you will typically find almost everyone starts with TLM based activities straight away, which is the most difficult level of doing activity. And teachers who try, they give up. So if I had more time, I would have liked to elaborate a bit more on how to find your own path to success by identifying, by breaking down what you want to do in smaller units and identifying what works for you. Everybody does not have the same path. And I would have even created a tool for a teacher to recreate his or her own school by answering a few questions and then being able to know what her individual path to the socially remodeled school would be. That would be one big chunk of what I would do. A second, uh, in order to do this, there are things that teachers need to understand to know more about children, about themselves, about social dimensions, about what is socially worth learning, and how to do that kind of classroom process. I would have added a lot more on that. And thirdly, and this is would be another big chunk of what I would add, which is that a school is a manifestation of a system. Uh, just as education cannot overcome the quality of the teacher, uh, a school or a teacher cannot go beyond the quality of the school system. It's very difficult. You are fighting against something. So it's very difficult for a school to remodel itself as a social space if education itself is not seen as a social space by administrators, school inspectors, officials, head teachers, policymakers, decision makers. So in fact, I don't think there is any instance where a district education officer is seen to be providing emotional support to a teacher. It does not happen. Professional means non-social, non-emotional connection. We need to overcome that. So I would have given a lot more space to how to make a systemic shift. In the earlier parts that I've talked about, I talked about the key question that was there when I began work in 1985. At that time, the big question was, how do children learn? By 2005, the big question was, how do teachers learn? But by 2015, the question became, how do systems learn? The first two questions, we now have a huge understanding. So many organizations have been working across. Not everybody has had the opportunity to work systemically. Some of us have had the opportunity, and we are all obviously learning a lot as we go along. There's a long way to go. But I would have liked to share some insights about how a system can evolve and change over a period of time to become, because the critical problem, which is the problem for the teacher also, when you teach using genuine activity or constructivist approach, you are giving up your power over children. That power only was what was preventing you. You had what I will call coercive power. That is, you could force children to do things, but you could not force them to like it. For that, you need another kind of power that is called generative power. That when children like being with you, they enjoy things, they learn a lot more and learn very different things. The same applies to helping teachers. You cannot coerce them to like children, but by using generative power, you can do that. And how do we create that generative power, that ability in system and system representatives to work different with teachers, so that the end result is a different kind of school with different kinds of processes and relationships. That is something I would have liked to write a lot more about.
So thank you so much, Subir, for that, for such an insightful discussion, and I have really been enriched by this whole process. Over to you, Prema, now, in case if you have some question in mind, or we are winding up the session.
I just have one question. I know we've reached the end of our session, but this is something I have been thinking about. You've said in your article, in 5 years' time, what will be happening in your school that does not happen now? Can you envisage some scenarios as examples? I know we are just at 5:30 now, so very
So
quickly, Subir. I'm sorry if we are exceeding the
I'd like to
time.
see. I want to visit the school and find that I cannot see the teacher because the teacher is hidden somewhere among students. I would like to see a student tell another student, "Okay, you don't have to agree with me, but at least listen to me." I would like to see students taking decisions or presenting their findings to the community. For example, they did a survey on water sources, and now they're sharing with community how they can bring down waterborne diseases. Uh, I would like to see uh, teachers visiting the home of a child and telling the parent that she is a little silent these days. What's going on? We'd like to know. I'd like to see a parent walk in and say, "I'm free tomorrow. Is there anything I can do?" Those are the things I would like to see. It's if you put yourself in that situation and ask yourself, what will be happening and what will I hear? That those questions they bring out some very concrete things. I want to emphasize it. I'm not saying things like I will have 100% attendance and retention. That's a meaningless statement. I want to see something which I can, for example, uh, two children approach the teacher and say, "Can we join the school too?" Or a headmaster saying, "I wish I had this kind of learning when I was a student." So uh, I envisage a school in those small but meaningful descriptors of the processes that I see happening there. There's a set of rules made by students about how the class will function, which is put up on a chart. And if the teacher doesn't follow that rule, also the teacher has to take whatever within quotes punishment is agreed upon by everyone. So I see a school of that kind, which is based on partnership, equality, where every day you look forward to coming. You run to the school, but you walk very slowly away from it. That's the kind of school I'd like to see.
Thank you very much. It's been such an enlightening discussion, and we have a whole lot of questions for you, Subir. But unfortunately, time is a restraint, and I'm sure the audience has enjoyed it as much as all three of us have, all four of us here behind the scenes. And thank you very, very much indeed for agreeing to join us and give us your interesting and far reaching views on education. And just how you said, I wish the headmaster says that I had been taught like this. I can tell you that I am now saying that I wish I had been taught like this. So thanks a
Yeah.
lot to Meenakshi for sparing the time, Subir for sparing your time, and the audience also for sparing the time and being with us, giving us comments, encouraging us. The next installment will be on the 6th of April, same time, and we hope that you will be there and to see who is next and what we are going to discuss. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone, and all the best.